The stars above Viron 9 burned quietly as war tore through the galaxy below. The Galactic Alliance, once the strongest united force of peace and protection, was now falling apart. Its greatest fleets had been shattered, its proudest warriors defeated. The Drekker, cold, ancient, and merciless, had come like a wave of darkness, destroying everything in their path. No one had expected them to be so fast, so brutal, or so unstoppable. Planets that had stood for centuries were now ashes. Cities that once glowed with life were now silent graves. And now, their target was Viron 9, the last strategic stronghold in the Outer Rim. If it fell, the entire region would collapse. The remaining council members of the Alliance gathered aboard the ship Unity, orbiting high above the battlefield, their faces pale, their voices quiet. The mood inside the command chamber was cold. Reports showed nothing but loss. Resistance units were scattered. Supplies were almost gone. Reinforcements? There were none. One by one, generals spoke of surrender, of evacuating the last civilians, of saving what little remained. But deep within the room, beyond the maps and screens, sat a small black box. It was locked, old, and rarely mentioned. To some, it was a relic of a time best forgotten. But to a few, it was the final hope. Admiral Kefron, the oldest member of the council, stared at the box without speaking. His mind drifted to stories he had heard long ago, during his early training days, stories about a planet called Earth. Not the Earth of politics or trade, but the Earth of soldiers. Warriors who fought like shadows. Fighters who didn't need numbers or weapons of mass destruction, just a mission and a target. He had always believed those stories were myths, tales passed down to scare cadets or inspire desperate minds. But as he looked around the room and saw fear in the eyes of even the bravest leaders, something inside him shifted. Slowly, he stood and walked to the box. The room fell silent as he unlocked it using an old code. The lights on the box turned green, and a soft sound played, a sound not heard in over 2 centuries. A voice came from the system. Earth Fire Protocol initiated. Stand by for secure uplink. Confused murmurs filled the room. Some shouted in protest, saying it was too risky, that Earth had isolated itself long ago. Others whispered in fear, knowing that activating this protocol meant asking for help from those who didn't fight for politics or alliances, they fought for something else, something far more personal and dangerous. But Kefron ignored the noise. "You all forget," he said quietly, "Earth didn't leave the Alliance because it was weak. It left because we were afraid of how strong they had become." He looked at the screen as it blinked with a countdown. "And now, we need that strength." The signal was sent. No one knew if it would be received. Earth hadn't answered a single message in over 200 years. Their systems were silent. Their borders were closed. No one even knew if the old war clans still existed. But within minutes, a reply came. Just 2 words. No name. No rank. No questions. Just this, confirmed. Deploying. The message was short, but it sent a chill through everyone in the room. The younger officers looked at each other in confusion. The older ones, those who remembered the old files and sealed reports, just stared at the screen. They knew what this meant. And deep down, so did the Drekker. Across the battlefield on Viron 9, the Drekker commanders laughed as they broke through the last shield barriers. Their machines were massive, their weapons louder than thunder. The defenders were falling back with every hour. It was no longer a fight, it was a slaughter. But high above the battle, a small black transport appeared in the dark space. It didn't carry a fleet. It didn't flash lights or signals. It just floated there for a moment, then descended toward the planet. The Drekker picked it up on their scanners and laughed again. One ship. No escorts. No defense systems. They assumed it was a desperate civilian escape craft, maybe someone who had gotten lost. They let it pass. But inside that silent ship were 12 beings tall, silent and covered in armor so dark it seemed to swallow light. They didn't speak. They didn't pray. They didn't hope. They were already ready. These were the Earthborn. Each one had been chosen, not for their size or strength, but for what they had survived, trained from childhood to fight not just with weapons, but with the mind and spirit. They had faced storms that burned flesh, traps that broke the body, and simulations designed to crush the soul. And they had passed. Earth hadn't forgotten the galaxy, it had simply prepared for the day it would be needed again. And now that day had come. As the Earthborn walked down the ramp of the ship, stepping into the war-torn soil of Viron 9, they didn't look at the enemy or the destruction. They didn't wait for orders. They already knew what had to be done. For the Drekker, it was just another planet to conquer. For the Earthborn, it was a mission. And missions were never left incomplete. The command center aboard Unity watched in silence. The room that had once been filled with panic was now quiet with anticipation. No one dared speak. The maps showed movements small at first, then spreading quickly. Communication lines from Drekker outposts began to go dark. Patrols vanished. No explosions. No noise. Just silence, where once there had been chaos. The Drekker responded by sending more units. Then tanks. Then elite warbeasts. But they too disappeared. The Earthborn didn't fight loud battles. They didn't waste time. Every strike was precise. Every step was calculated. They weren't soldiers. They were the storm before silence. And for the first time in many months, hope returned to the hearts of the Alliance. Because even though the battle seemed lost, and the galaxy had nearly given up, something had changed. The enemy no longer advanced with confidence. Their ships stopped. Their signals broke. Their commanders hesitated. Because now, they faced something they didn't understand. Something that couldn't be predicted. Something born on a small blue planet, far away and long forgotten. Something that had waited in silence for the right moment to return. And now that moment had arrived. The Drekker warlords watched the skies with narrowed eyes as the black transport cut silently through the atmosphere of Viron 9. Unlike any ship seen before, it didn't emit the usual signals, didn't broadcast any identity, and didn't follow standard approach paths. It ignored every Drekker warning frequency, passed through their defense nets as if they didn't exist, and made no attempt to hide yet. No weapon touched it. Their anti-aircraft fire missed entirely. Their targeting systems flickered and shut down when aimed at it, and their scanners returned errors as if the ship was not made of matter but shadow. Even the war beasts, trained to feel the presence of life from miles away, growled in confusion and paced restlessly, their senses dulled by something ancient and unfamiliar. The black ship didn't rush or dodge, it moved with a strange, patient calm, like it already knew nothing could stop it. As it landed just beyond the edge of the ruined city of Kalshun, smoke rising around it and the battlefield deathly silent, the Drekker generals began to realize this was not an ordinary deployment. This was a message. Inside the command chamber of the Drekker fleet carrier, General Krosh stood like a statue, arms crossed behind his back, his four crimson eyes focused on the slow descent of the unknown vessel. He had fought for over 80 years, conquered more than 30 systems, and broken 6 major civilizations. But in all his campaigns, he had never felt a presence like this, something unseen, unspoken, but heavy, like a storm building beyond the horizon. When the ramp of the transport opened, the silence deepened. 12 figures stepped out, each covered in armor so black it seemed to drink the light around them. Their movements were smooth and controlled, not rushed, not showy. They didn't shout. They didn't raise their weapons. They just walked forward, surveying the burned battlefield like surgeons inspecting a patient. And even from a distance, the Drekker felt it, that chilling aura of deadly purpose. The Earthborn had arrived. These were not soldiers in the usual sense. They didn't wear medals, didn't carry flags, and didn't need support. Their armor had no insignias, no visible systems, yet it protected them from extreme firepower. Their weapons were compact and strange, part blade, part rifle, part unknown. But what terrified the observers most wasn't the gear or the tech, it was the stillness in their movements, the focus in their posture, like they'd been waiting for this moment their whole lives. There were no nervous twitches, no glances back, no hesitation. They moved with purpose, like they had already seen the battle before it began. Far above, aboard the Unity, Admiral Kefron watched the feeds in stunned silence. Live footage from ground drones showed the Earthborn approaching the outer lines of the Drekker army, who had gathered nearly 1,000 troops to meet this unknown force. Kefron had expected the Earthborn to strike with stealth, to attack in the shadows like ghosts. But they walked straight into the front lines, unafraid, unmoved, like death itself had taken human form and was now marching across the ashes of war. The Drekker opened fire first missiles, lasers, plasma rounds, all unleashed in a massive, brutal wave meant to erase everything in front of them. The battlefield lit up with fire and thunder. But when the smoke cleared, the Earthborn were still walking. Some of the projectiles had bent mid-air, others had exploded early. A few had vanished entirely before contact. Whatever armor or shield they wore was beyond understanding. But that wasn't what froze the Drekker in fear. It was the way one of the Earthborn, without stopping, raised a hand and pointed at a Drekker cannon, and it exploded from the inside, its metal curling like paper. No sound. No warning. Just pure, efficient destruction. Then the Earthborn moved. Not like normal soldiers charging into battle. They split and vanished into smoke, appearing behind Drekker units, striking with blades that passed through armor like cloth. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. And they didn't leave survivors. In less than 5 minutes, the front line was broken. Not pushed back, erased. Entire squads disappeared. War beasts ran howling into the hills. Officers who had led battles for decades dropped their weapons and tried to retreat. But retreating meant nothing now. The Earthborn had already mapped every path. They knew where the Drekker would run, where they would regroup, where they would beg for backup. And in each of those places, another Earthborn waited. It was as if they were not just fighting a war, they were closing a chapter. General Krosch finally gave the order to retreat from Kalshun, a command that had never been spoken in his entire life. As his forces pulled back in chaos, he slammed his fists into the wall of the carrier, furious and afraid. "What are they?" One of his sub-commanders whispered, barely able to form the words. Krosch's voice was low and shaken. "They are from Earth. And Earth doesn't send armies. It sends ends." Across the battlefield, scattered Drekker drones recorded scenes too fast and brutal to fully understand. One Earthborn flipped a warwalker onto its side with a single strike. Another disabled an entire command unit with 3 shots placed so precisely the enemy didn't even scream. Bodies dropped without sound. Blood stained the soil before footsteps could even be heard. And every time a Drekker tried to regroup, they found themselves surrounded not by hundreds, but by just 1 or 2 Earthborn, who moved like shadows and killed like silence. By nightfall, Kalshun belonged to no one. Not the Alliance. Not the Drekker. It belonged to the Earthborn now. The black transport stood at the center, untouched, quiet like a resting beast. Around it, the Earthborn didn't celebrate or even pause. They simply checked their surroundings, confirmed kill zones, and then waited. Not because they were tired, but because they were ready for the next wave. And deep in the command center of the Unity, as Alliance leaders watched the footage again and again, none of them could speak. Kefron finally broke the silence with a whisper. "This is what we kept hidden. This is what we feared. And now it's on our side." Far across space, Drekker reinforcements began receiving fragments of the battle cut-off calls, silent video feeds, static where once commanders shouted. They were told a planet had been lost, but not to an army, not to a fleet. Just 12 black armored figures who moved like the night and left behind nothing but silence. Panic spread slowly at first, then faster. Because now every Drekker warrior had the same question in their mind. If these were just the first Earthborn, how many more waited in the dark? The sun never fully rose over Kalshun after the Earthborn arrived. The air itself felt heavier, like the very ground remembered the footsteps of the black-armored humans. All across the destroyed city, there was a silence that even the wind dared not break. It was not the kind of quiet that came after victory, nor the peaceful kind that follows surrender. It was the eerie stillness of something unfinished, something waiting. The Drekker command ships, orbiting above had gone dark, some by force, others by fear. Across the fractured alliance channels, officers whispered about what had happened on the surface, trying to make sense of the footage they had seen, but there were no answers. The 12 Earthborn had vanished after taking Kalshun, leaving behind no bodies, no evidence of who they were, only shattered weapons, scorched stone, and a single Drekker flag torn in half, hanging from the broken spire at the city's heart. The Alliance had no official explanation. No orders were issued. No memorials were held. Because no one dared speak too loudly about what had happened, as if saying it aloud might summon those shadowed warriors back from the ruins. On the bridge of the Drekker warcruiser Bloodrift, Commander Sharnak paced in silence. His claws clicked against the polished floor, the sound oddly loud in the quiet chamber. He'd received the transmission like everyone else, only 30 seconds of raw, uncut footage from Kalshun's final hours, but it had been enough to change everything. For a species raised on conquest and strength, the Drekker had never known true fear until that day. They'd fought enemies twice their size, survived plasma storms, and crushed rebellions with ease. But what they faced now wasn't something they could understand. Sharnak paused by the observation screen, staring at the broken planet below, wondering if the black transport was still there, waiting. Some of his soldiers had begun speaking in whispers, saying the humans were not soldiers but something older, something summoned. Others believed the black transport itself was alive, and that the ones who stepped from it were not from Earth at all but from something beneath Earth, hidden from even their own kind. The Alliance, once so proud, now moved with caution. Ships that once patrolled boldly now avoided the sector where Kalshun had fallen. Commanders who once doubted Earth's strength now sat in long meetings, watching the same recordings over and over, pausing every frame, trying to learn anything that could explain how 12 humans could shatter an entire Drekker front without even calling for air support. The audio had been the most disturbing part. There was none. No shouting. No screaming. No commands. Just the sound of footsteps, brief bursts of weapons fire, and then nothing. The silence had become a symbol. Across both Drekker and Alliance networks, it earned a name, the Quiet End. Rumors spread like wildfire, and with them came doubt. Troops refused deployment orders near Kalshun. Some left their posts without permission, and others experienced warriors who had fought for decades simply vanished, unwilling to face what might return from that black transport. But the Earthborn had not left. Not entirely. In the shadows of the ruined city, they waited not to conquer, but to finish something. Each one remained hidden, separated across the region, studying, listening. Their orders had not been to win a war. Their mission was to remind the galaxy what Earth truly was. Humanity had been underestimated for too long, seen as weak, emotional, unrefined. And that had been Earth's greatest weapon, the lie. For centuries, they had shown the galaxy only a portion of their true strength. Only diplomats, scientists, and merchants were sent into space. The rest, the ones trained for war, for survival, for extinction-level threats, had remained hidden, buried deep beneath Earth's surface, waiting for a time when silence would speak louder than fleets. That time had come. Aboard the Unity, Admiral Kefron stared at a blinking report on his personal screen. It was marked Level 0 Eyes, Only Access. The document detailed a Drekker retreat from Sector V9, not because of combat, but because a single black figure had been seen standing on a hilltop near the ruins. No attack had occurred. No ship had landed. The Drekker simply saw the figure and left, abandoning a fortified base. It had taken them years to build it, but they gave it up in less than an hour. Kefron closed the report and leaned back, the weight of the situation settling deeper into his chest. The Earthborn had changed the battlefield, not by numbers or weapons, but by the idea they left behind, that even when you couldn't see them, they were there. That fear alone could break armies, and that silence itself could be a weapon. Far below, within the ruins, Earthborn Agent Solon knelt beside a Drekker data core he had extracted from a fallen enemy Met. He worked in silence, his breathing steady, his mind focused. He wasn't just collecting intelligence, he was studying Drekker psychology, tracking their patterns, learning how they thought. Every Earthborn had a different purpose. Some destroyed, others observed, and some, like Solon, unraveled the enemy's soul without saying a word. When he finished his work, he didn't leave a trace. The data core vanished into his suit, and he melted back into the shadows, leaving behind only footprints in the dust and a small metal token pressed into the stone, a black disk with the symbol of Earth, scratched by hand. Later that week, an Alliance scout ship entered orbit around Kal Shun. It carried no weapons, only sensors. Its crew had been ordered not to land, not to interfere, only to scan from a distance and confirm the area was safe. The readings they sent back confused everyone. There were no signs of human life, no heat signatures, no movement. And yet every camera feed showed something different. One showed a ruined street. Another showed it completely restored. One crew member saw a burning Drekker banner, while another swore the pole was clean. The data was corrupted, shifting, unreliable, as if the planet itself no longer obeyed normal rules. The scout ship returned, shaken and silent. The mission logs were locked away. No further scans were authorized. And Kal Shun was marked a black zone, no entry, no explanation. That night, across every Drekker colony, whispers began again. Messages between old soldiers. Quiet warnings. Some called it a curse. Others said Earth had summoned its deadliest guardians. But one message, brief and terrifying, was repeated more than any other: if you hear nothing, run. And across command centers, bunkers, and starships, both Drekker and Alliance alike began to understand a truth they could not escape: there would be no negotiation with these humans, no terms, no treaties. Because when Earth deployed its most dangerous soldiers, it didn't want peace. It wanted silence. And silence had arrived. The day everything changed began without warning: no sirens, no grand announcements, and no visible sign that the universe was about to tilt in a way it never had before. The war between the Galactic Alliance and Earth had dragged on for years, filled with bloodshed, betrayals, and battles lost on both sides, yet no one had expected what came next. For a long time, humans were thought of as unpredictable, emotional, and too chaotic to be a real threat to ancient organized empires like the Drekker Dominion and the Varn Coalition. These alien races had ruled the stars for centuries, believing themselves superior in all ways, stronger, faster, more disciplined, but they had miscalculated something vital. Humans had one thing none of the others possessed: the ability to adapt in ways that defied logic, and a terrifying persistence that only grew stronger under pressure. When the Earth Defense Command lost 3 outer colonies in a single month, everyone believed the end was near. The morale was low, the fleets were scattered, and the alliances Earth had managed to form were starting to collapse. On the surface, it looked like humanity was on its knees, but beneath that surface, deep inside secret installations and hidden bunkers, something else had been happening. Earth was preparing for one final move: not to win, not to survive, but to change the rules of the war entirely. The operation was named Turning Point, and only 6 people in the entire human military knew what it truly meant. As the remaining Earth forces retreated to the edge of the Orion Belt, the Drekker fleet surged forward, confident they were moments away from total victory. What they didn't know was that the humans weren't fleeing. They were baiting a trap. In the cold void near the planet Eros 9, Earth's last heavy cruiser, Vigilance powered down all external systems and drifted silently among asteroids, completely invisible to enemy sensors. On board, Captain Alina Vera stood at the central console, her face lit only by the faint glow of standby lights, her expression calm but focused. She had no illusions about what was coming. The Drekker Armada was massive: hundreds of warships, carriers, and dreadnoughts, and Vigilance had only one shot to make this moment count. Operation Turning Point wasn't just a counterattack, it was a gamble built on a desperate truth: that no one truly understood humans, not even humans themselves. Alina glanced at the small metallic case next to her console. Inside it was the neural trigger, a device that would activate the Titan protocol. The galaxy had heard rumors about Titan-class soldiers, enhanced warriors built for extinction-level battles, but no one had ever seen one in combat. That was because they hadn't been used until now. As the Drekker ships moved into the ambush zone, the first explosion came from inside a Drekker dreadnought, not from an external attack, but from a Titan breaching the core reactor using only handheld tools and brutal efficiency. One by one, Drekker ships began to fall not because of overwhelming firepower, but because they were being dissected from the inside, taken apart methodically by human weapons that had never been shared, never been seen, and never been stopped. The Alliance watched in confusion as fleet after fleet stopped responding, communications went silent, and emergency signals were cut mid-scream. What they witnessed next was something no one could explain. A single Titan soldier, standing on the exterior hull of a Drekker ship, staring into the bridge through armored glass, as if daring them to fight back. The image spread across enemy networks like wildfire, and in that moment, a wave of silence swept across command centers galaxy-wide. No one had prepared for this. No one had believed that humans, once considered the underdogs of the galaxy, could launch such a brutal, precise, and terrifying offensive. But this was not just an attack, it was a message. Earth would not be conquered. It would not be forgotten. And it would never kneel. Back on the Vigilance, Captain Alina watched as green indicators lit up across her screen, one after the other, signals that each Titan squad had completed their objectives. The Drekker flagship tried to retreat, but before its engines could power up, a single transmission played across all channels. It was a human voice, calm, steady, and unshaken. You came for Earth. Now Earth has come for you. It was the last thing the Drekker commanders heard before the flagship's core overloaded and turned into a burning star in the black sky. Panic spread faster than orders. Alliance ships turned on each other in confusion. Entire squadrons surrendered without firing a shot. And those who managed to flee did so with a new fear buried deep in their minds that Earth was not just defending itself anymore. It was rising. And it was angry. In the weeks that followed, reports from across the galaxy told the same story: Drekker outposts abandoned overnight, Varn supply lines disrupted by invisible saboteurs, and new signals detected near ancient battlefields where Earth had previously lost. But now those same places echoed with new sounds: explosions, human war songs, and the boots of soldiers who refused to die. The turning point had arrived, and with it, the galaxy changed forever. The humans, once seen as wild and scattered, had become a force that no longer fought to survive. They fought to lead, to dominate, and to remind every species that underestimated them that the true power of humanity was never their numbers or their technology. It was their will to stand, even when broken, even when outnumbered, even when the entire universe believed they were finished. That will had now become a storm, and it was sweeping across the stars with no sign of stopping. And so the galaxy, once filled with prideful empires and ancient rulers, looked to the stars and wondered not if Earth would strike again, but when. Long after the first war between Earth and the Galactic Federation had ended, and the names of the great warriors who once saved humanity were lost in old archives and fading memories, a strange signal was received from a forgotten sector beyond the rim of known space. It was a sector declared dead, uninhabitable, and cursed by those who dared to explore it. Yet the signal came, steady and deliberate, pulsing in a pattern that resembled an old Earth military code, one that hadn't been used in over 100 years. When Earth's Command Council traced the source, they discovered something no one expected. The signal originated from the wreckage of the old dreadnought Helios, a legendary warship believed to have been destroyed in the final battle of the First Galactic Conflict. The Helios had carried Earth's finest soldiers, a team known as the Last Guard, enhanced humans trained to face extinction without fear. They were celebrated as heroes once, but after the war, when Helios vanished in deep space, it was assumed all had died, their legacy buried under myths and classified reports. Now, somehow, the ship was sending a message, one that read only 2 words: Legends Reborn. Panic and hope stirred within Earth's high command. Some believed it was a trap, a clever ruse by an enemy hiding in the shadows, but others whispered about the impossible, that the Last Guard had survived. Commander Rayan Locke, a tactical officer with a sharp mind and little patience for superstition, was selected to lead a secret expedition to investigate the origin of the signal. His ship, the Vanguard, carried a team of specialists, scientists, and a historian named Elira Graves, who had spent her life studying the First Galactic War and the myths surrounding them. Shattered hull of the Helios, cracked but still intact. The crew docked cautiously, finding the inside covered in ice, darkness, and silence. Yet, strangely, power flowed through parts of the ship as if it had been preserved by some unknown force. What they found in the cryo chamber shocked everyone's 6 pods, still active, and 5 of them occupied. Life signs were stable. The last guard, or at least what remained of them, were still alive. The process of reawakening the old soldiers was slow. Their minds had been in stasis for decades, and their bodies required recalibration to function again. When the first of them opened his eyes, the silence broke. His name was Callan Rise, once the commander of the last guard, now reborn into a world that had forgotten him. He looked at Rayan with calm, tired eyes and asked only one thing: "Is the war truly over?" Before Rayan could respond, alarm screamed aboard Vanguard. A sudden energy spike blasted from the sector's edge. An ancient enemy, once thought extinct, had been waiting for this moment: the Dravari, a machine-like alien race that had vanished after the First War, now emerged from the darkness with ships shaped like knives and engines that whispered like ghosts. They'd used the Helios as bait, hoping to lure Earth into a trap. But they had made one mistake: they had not expected the last guard to wait. Callan and the others adjusted quickly, their instincts sharper than any modern soldier, their understanding of war forged in the fires of survival. They requested weapons, not questions, and used the old ship systems to power their suits and gear, which had lain dormant but intact for years. With Rayan's team under attack, the last guard deployed without hesitation. What followed was not just a defense, it was a reckoning. The Dravari were fast and merciless, but the last guard fought like shadows, silent, strategic, and devastating. Rayan watched as legends came to life before his eyes. Callan moved through enemy lines like a ghost, while Sarah, the team's sniper, struck targets before the enemy even knew they were exposed. Each member of the last guard remembered their duty not just to survive, but to protect humanity at all costs. As the battle dragged on, Elira discovered logs hidden deep within the Helios's memory banks. They told a different story, one the public had never known. The last guard had not vanished in battle. They had been betrayed. A powerful faction within the old Federation had deemed them too dangerous to remain alive after the war ended. Orders were sent to isolate and abandon them in deep space. But instead of dying, they had chosen stasis, hoping one day the truth would be revealed. Now that day had come. Rayan, furious over the truth, transmitted the logs back to Earth. The Command Council was shaken, forced to face a hidden part of history they had long buried. Meanwhile, in the dark edges of space, the battle reached its peak. The Dravari flagship unleashed a weapon designed to erase memory and energy pulse that could strip the minds of anyone it touched. The last guard had faced such horrors before. Callan led a direct assault, breaching the enemy ship with explosive force, sacrificing himself to destroy the core and save the Vanguard. He smiled in the end, knowing he had kept his oath. One by one, the remaining guard held the line until the Dravari retreated, shattered and afraid. They had come to silence the past, but instead, they woke something far stronger: hope. Back on Earth, everything changed. The surviving members of the last guard were offered high honors, but they refused medals. They didn't want statues. They wanted truth. The public, once fed only lies and filtered stories, now learned the real cost of victory and the real weight of sacrifice. Rayan and Elira stood at the newly rebuilt Hall of Valor as a new monument was unveiled, not of politicians or admirals, but of 6 soldiers standing together, watching the stars. Their legend had been erased once, but now it had returned stronger than ever. And in every corner of human space, whispers began again, not of fear, but of respect. Because when the galaxy forgot who protected them, the protectors returned to remind them. And that was the true meaning of the message: legends reborn.